Hi, everybody, and welcome to the 2020 legislation roundup and looking at the year ahead, various different topics. So I am excited to introduce you to Tom. Tom, would you like to, oh, there we go. Tom, would you like to introduce yourself?
Hello, I'm Tom Angell. I'm the editor and publisher of Marijuana Moment, which is a news outlet that tracks cannabis and drug policy reform.
And would you say this webinar was your idea?
I think it was a joint idea between the two of us.
So thank you for the idea and excited to be doing it and very excited that we have such a great panel put together. And this is our second year doing this. So Justin joined us last year. Happy to introduce Justin. Would you like to introduce yourself to the group?
Absolutely. Thank you so very much, Karen. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Justin Strekal, and I'm the political director for NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, where I serve as its federal lobbyist and an advisor to our national network of chapters.
And last but not least, the other Karen, potentially the vastly more knowledgeable Karen on these matters. Very excited to have Karen joining us this year for our look at 2020 and our look ahead. Karen, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure, glad to be here. I'm Karen O'Keefe and I direct the state legislative department at the Marijuana Policy Project, and I've been with MPP since 2003.
All right, so as you will find out as we go through this, these are the who's who of people who know stuff. So let's dive in, and you guys can go on video if you want to, but you don't have to. So, all right, so I just thought we'd start out with may you live in interesting times. So such it is, and it has impacted all parts of our life and various lawmaking and so on. These interesting times of ours. So let's take a look at what we would like to talk about today. As you've probably heard, there were a bunch of ballot measures passed. So we're going to talk about those, what states, what it means, and what might happen next. We will look at legislation from the year, things that passed, things that didn't, and what we expect to happen in 2021. And then we have to talk about current events and what impact the election is going to have on marijuana policy, how the events around Black Lives Matter and the protests might impact policy going forward, and then of course coronavirus and how that has changed all of our lives, including some things in this arena. Okay, so that is the program for today, and we're just going to get started right away with ballot measures. And I think Tom wanted to field this one. Tom,
sure.
Your thoughts?
So the upcoming 2021 state legislative sessions and the 117th Congress that are about to begin, and which we'll talk about in a few minutes, come in the context of voters in 5 states overwhelmingly and unanimously approving marijuana initiatives that were on the ballots there. Just a quick run through of those. 4 additional states legalized marijuana for adult use or recreational marijuana. In some of the states, it was a little bit of a convoluted situation with multiple questions on the ballot, but suffice it to say that Montana, Arizona, South Dakota, and New Jersey all legalized adult use marijuana. In New Jersey, it was a unique situation because it was a referendum placed on the ballot by lawmakers, and that's the first time that's ever happened in the United States. And then when it comes to medical cannabis, South Dakota, which I just said legalized recreational marijuana, also passed a separate measure to legalize medical cannabis, and Mississippi legalized medical cannabis as well. I think it's also worth noting here, although it's not depicted on the slide, that the debate on drug policy reform is increasingly moving beyond marijuana. And in that context, voters in Oregon approved 2 far-reaching ballot measures last month. One to decriminalize possession of all drugs, and a separate measure to legalize psilocybin therapy. Additionally, voters in the nation's capital in Washington, D.C. passed a measure to decriminalize, or more accurately, deprioritize the enforcement of laws against plant and fungi-based psychedelics.
So when we talk about decriminalization or deprioritization, what does that actually mean?
So in DC, the measure there makes the possession of laws against plant and fungi-based psychedelics among the city's lowest law enforcement priorities, which doesn't really have too much of a binding effect on police. It mostly just sends a message to them, hey, the voters don't really want you putting people into handcuffs for these things. And then in Oregon, with the so-called decriminalization measure, it essentially removes the threat of jail time for possessing a small amount of those drugs, and basically gives people the option to enter a treatment program or pay, I think it's $100 fine.
All right, thank you. I was just curious how much of an impact that really has, and it sounds like some, right?
Yeah, and also that Oregon decriminalization measure, it takes some existing tax revenue from legal cannabis sales and puts that into funding increased treatment services.
Interesting. Okay. Thank you, Tom. So that all brings us to kind of the new picture. And this is the map that I took from Marijuana Policy. What do we got here, Karen?
So here is a map of all of the different states and where they are on marijuana policy reform. The dark blue states have made marijuana legal for adults 21 and older and have regulated sales, although that is still being implemented in some of the states. They also all happen to have medical cannabis laws on the books. The states that are in black have a decriminalization law, which means no jail time for first-time possession, as was mentioned, and that's it. The states that are light gray have a medical cannabis law in the books, but nothing else, no decrim. And then the ones that are light blue have both decrim and medical marijuana. There are also, most of the states have at least some kind of low CBD law. A few of them have in-state access for that as well. So everybody has, except for sad Idaho, has at least a little something on the books. And this is a lot of progress since I started at MPP and in the last 20 years or so, but we're still way behind where public opinion is. Gallup found that 68% of Americans think marijuana should be legal. We only have 15 states where it's legal. There's a polling group called Civics that polls in every single state, and all but one have majority support, and that one has plurality support for legalization. And Quinnipiac asked people if they think medical marijuana should be legal. They found 93% support, which is more people than believe humans have landed on the moon, yet still we only have 36 states. So we're making progress, but there's still much to be done.
Well, this map makes it clear that it's well over half of the country has something in legalized, at least medical, or decriminalized, or just flat out legalized. So clearly there's a lot of progress, and it looks like some of the most populous states. So I have to imagine this is well over half the population of the United States as well.
That has something, indeed. Yeah,
yes.
We're at about a third of the country that has legal marijuana and about 72% that has medical marijuana.
Okay, very excellent. All right, so by the way, for the attendees, you will be mailed this slideshow after sometime tomorrow when that happens automatically. So you will get these slides, and they've got some links that go with them and some other information. So you will get all of this information as part of attending the webinar, just so that you know. All right, so moving on to the possible future.
Right, so in the upcoming midterm elections next year, it's expected that marijuana is going to be on the ballot in another round of states. In Nebraska, where activists this year actually collected a sufficient number of signatures to qualify a medical marijuana initiative for the ballot, but which was removed by the state Supreme Court because they determined it violated the state's single subject law. Those same activists are now already in the process of collecting signatures for a new simplified version of a medical cannabis legalization measure for 2022. They also more recently just announced that they're separately going to be circulating an additional measure to legalize recreational marijuana. Also, activists in Idaho, although it's not pictured here, are currently collecting signatures for a medical cannabis initiative in 2022. And then it's expected that we might see a number of other campaigns launch over the coming months, mostly places in which activists tried this year to qualify marijuana measures for the ballot, but were impeded by the coronavirus pandemic and resulting social distancing measures that were put into place that made petitioning impossible or difficult. And so there might be a couple of very big states coming on board with adult use marijuana, including Florida and Ohio. Of course, because those are big states, you need a lot of signatures, which means it's pretty expensive to get something on the ballot and then mount a campaign there. Also, it's worth noting that historically, marijuana policy reform measures perform better in presidential years as opposed to midterm elections due to the turnout dynamics. More likely supporters are more likely to show up for presidential election, although we've seen a lot of initiatives pass in midterm years as well. Also, one other note on Florida, their state initiative laws there are a little weird. You need 60% approval on the ballot in order to pass it. And that's worth thinking about when considering mounting a campaign there, because although Florida voters legalized medical cannabis during the presidential election year of 2016, 2 years earlier in 2014, there was also a medical marijuana measure on the ballot. It did get clear majority support, but it did not get that key 60% threshold and failed.
That is frustrating.
Yeah, and then in places like Oklahoma and Arkansas and a few other states also Missouri tried to mount efforts this year that didn't end up collecting enough signatures to get on the ballot. We may see folks try again in those places and others 2 years from now.
Yeah, it was definitely a hard year to get signatures. And as far as Nebraska, that feels like, Lucy pulling away the football, having the Supreme Court say that you got your signatures, but you still can't do it.
Yeah.
Kind of a crazy story. All right. So Karen, Justin, anything you want to talk about as far as the ballot measure landscape that you see coming?
No, I think Tom did a good job of covering it. Justin?
I can add the astute comment that Tom did a very good job of covering.
All right, so let us move into the legislation. So of course, the past ballot measures are going to matter for next year, for 2021. But lots still happened in 2020. And it's not only ballot measures that get marijuana legalized, however, that is often the way that it happens. So let us go ahead and take a look at what we got. So moving into some federal issues to start with, which I think is Justin. Although, Tom, did you have anything that you wanted to say as we move into the legislation?
Prepare to hear brilliant things from Justin. And go.
Yeah, I cannot tell you how excited I am to be able to say these words. Recently, for the first time in U.S. history, a chamber of Congress has passed legislation to end federal marijuana prohibition. The passage of the MORE Act was an incredibly exciting moment. It happened just a week and a half ago, December 4th. I will note that December 4th is also Jay-Z's birthday. I've realized that since then, after re-listening to the Black album. No, I think that, first off, just for context of what the MORE Act is, it's the Marijuana Opportunity Reinvestment and Expungement Act of 2020. It used to be called of 2019, but we updated it this year. So what the bill does at its core is it removes marijuana from Schedule I status in the CSA and removes it from the Controlled Substances Act entirely. That is, in our view, the only intellectually honest and consistent way to fall in line with various lawmakers' pledges and recently elected officials' pledges to decriminalize marijuana at the federal level, because a rescheduling regime would still maintain criminal penalties for adult possession without a prescription. And under every state medical regime, they're all based on recommendations, not prescriptions. Therefore, even every medical patient would still be in violation of federal law for mere possession of cannabis. So it removes marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act, and then it has components that would automatically trigger expungement and review for those who have suffered federal charges for marijuana possession and associated minor nonviolent offenses, as well as critically provide incentives for states and localities to do the same. one of the most common questions one of the most common answers I gave to questions in the last couple of weeks for like, why doesn't the MORE Act, mandate the expungement of local level charges that have been levied? And I just have to say, because federalism. This is a common misconception about the role of the federal government, and the fact that overwhelmingly the majority of charges that have been levied against individuals have been done so by state and local law enforcement.
Yep.
So at the federal level, the feds can provide carrots and sticks. They provide carrots to incentivize states and localities to expunge those records. The last big component of the MORE Act is what it does through the Small Business Administration. What it does, it has two components. The first is it provides incentives for states and local governments to enact licensing structures that prioritize local and diversely reflective ownership, prioritizing those who have been harmed during the war on drugs, specifically for cannabis offenses. Meaning if you have a cannabis related charge on your record, or if a member of your family does, or if you live in a locality that has been historically over policed, where essentially law enforcement has used the justification of marijuana criminalization to occupy your neighborhood and go into your children's pockets, those areas, you would be able to be first in line for consideration of a license in the emerging legal industry through a social equity program. So that's to incentivize states and localities to promote local and diverse ownership. And then the second component is actually has direct funding for the SBA to assist those who are qualifying for social equity licenses to offset the costs of license applications, other applications. We're working with Mr. Huffman's office of California to cover other licensing costs, as well as microloans and assistance in filling out and navigating the complicated bureaucratic network that's been established for legal cannabis sales. So it's a really, really historic bill. There's still a lot of work that needs to get done. I would be remiss to not mention its shortcomings. There was language that was kind of half-cocked that was inserted at the very end that needs to get fleshed out because it could be interpreted in a discriminatory fashion. And additionally, and most notably, the bill does have it does not include a post-prohibition regulatory structure, meaning some kind of a federal apparatus that will guide states towards unifying their policies to ensure easy interstate commerce, standardized weights and measurements, labeling, et cetera, et cetera. So these are all things that we look forward to working on in the next Congress to continue to perfect the bill. But really, I mean, just again, I'll say it again. For the first time in US history, a chamber of Congress has passed a bill to end federal marijuana prohibition. And that's 50 years in the making. So it's really exciting.
And that wasn't a weak bill. I mean, it's pretty strong. It's got pretty thorough provisions in there.
Yeah, we're very excited. We had a lot of people, tell us that we were never going to be able to get it done. We had a lot of people, even in the marijuana industry, who were actively lobbying against this because it would create the pathway towards interstate commerce. It would, for example, Colorado operators don't want less expensive Oregon cannabis hitting the shelves in Colorado. So it was a really difficult road to hoe. But we made it. It's really exciting. And now we have a precedent of 228 members of Congress voting in favor of ending marijuana prohibition.
That is exciting. And as Karen pointed out, that reflects the democratic will of the people. So it is also right and proper. So I've got a picture of Nadler there. He sponsored the bill in the House, right?
Yes, Jerry Nadler, the chairman of the Judiciary, carried the bill in the House. I want to also always give acknowledgement and props to Congressman Earl Blumenauer and Congresswoman Barbara Lee, the Democratic co-chairs of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus, as well as Congressman Don Young, one of the Republican co-chairs who voted in favor of the bill. I know Tom might want to. I'm not going to say his name right now, but Tom might want to weigh in there.
Congressman David Joyce, Republican of Ohio, somehow is a co-chair of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus and did not vote for the bill to federally legalize marijuana. I don't know. That's weird to me.
So that happened. And then and also just appreciation for Democratic Caucus Chairman Hakeem Jeffries, as well as the Democratic leadership who allowed the members to vote on this bill. because it's certainly, in the context of everything that's happening right now, we got a global pandemic, we got an ensuing economic crisis. We have, we're very really likely going to see historic levels of evictions and unemployment and homelessness in the middle of winter during a pandemic. Like, things are bad right now, and they could have very easily denied us this vote. And they did in September. We thought we were going to have it, and then they punted it until after the election. But it doesn't matter when it's or why you agree with us, as long as you do. And we've demonstrated that the House of Representatives agrees that it's time to end marijuana prohibition.
All right. So as you've emphasized several times, it's one chamber. So I've got Kamala Harris up there because she.
So the Senate campaign is carried by now Vice President, officially Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. Senator Harris has gone through a long evolution on her stance on marijuana policy. And critics of hers to this day for marijuana policy are right to point out her previous transgressions, but we're very appreciative of her leadership now. Since arriving in the Senate, she's come a very long way, and we appreciate her acknowledgement and her thoughtfulness of evolving her policy. And we sincerely hope that as vice president, she is going to continue to be a champion for marijuana policy reform and be that voice to bring administrative leadership to this issue in Congress, and hopefully be able to navigate a way to break the gridlock in the Senate. One of my most common things I say when referring to the Senate is that Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell thoroughly enjoys seeing Americans be arrested and incarcerated for mere marijuana possession. And it's very difficult to see how we're going to be able to move a bill that ends federal criminalization as long as Mitch McConnell is the Republican Senate leader and Republicans maintain control of the chamber.
So we'll definitely talk about that a little bit more as we get further into this presentation. But to be clear, you don't anticipate the MORE Act making it out of the Senate this year.
I don't say that. There's Mitch McConnell. A lot of people, everyone should have a strong opinion on him, and I'm not going to share my personal one. But I think it's undeniable that he's one of the most effective legislators in U.S. history, and I think that given the fact that even members in his leadership team now represent states that have legalized marijuana. And increasingly threatening his Republican majority. We were just discussing what's happening on the ballot or potentially on the ballot in 2020 or 2022. That's Republican Senator Rob Portman in Ohio. That's Republican Senator Marco Rubio in Florida. They're all Republican senator states. So it'll be really interesting to see if he should decide to create for himself the space to evolve on this issue. Because you can credibly say that ending marijuana prohibition is a states' rights issue, and we all know how much Mitch McConnell loves to talk about states' rights. So it's going to be a really interesting pathway going forward. I will also touch on this slide. We say the Safe Banking Act. The Safe Banking Act has made history in the fact that it's passed 3 different times in the U.S. House of Representatives this year. First on a floor vote on September 25th, 2019. With an overwhelmingly high 321 votes in the House. 47% of elected Republicans voted yes on that bill when it came up on suspension. And then since then, it's passed the House 2 more times, being included in the COVID Heroes package. But unfortunately, the Republican-led Senate has yet taken up either the standalone Safe Banking Act or either of the Heroes coronavirus packages that the House has sent over.
So talk for just a second about how banking even comes into marijuana as an issue.
Very simply, banks controlling all of the wealth that they do not want to engage in interaction or in relationships with marijuana businesses, because marijuana businesses are illegal under federal law. We talk about this emerging legal cannabis industry as if it's a normal thing. With an A, normal with an A. But it's really not. Like, every single CEO of a marijuana company in this country is analogous to a heroin kingpin in the eyes of the federal government. So it's really interesting to see. And banks, candidly, would they appreciate their money in their holdings? Absolutely. And that's why we saw the American Banking Association come in and I work with their lobbyists, and they aggressively supported the Safe Banking Act to ensure its passage last year. but you know, like it's not worth it to them, right? So we see some local banks and local credit unions providing basic services, but right now most marijuana companies are going unbanked, means they can't take debit cards or credit cards, they can't, you know, they can't write checks. And I can't imagine running my personal life without a bank account, let alone a business. So it's a very real problem, especially in this age of, you know, increased delivery and curbside pickup, where, you know, we want to reduce transmission points of COVID. It would be a lot easier if consumers can make electronic payments. It'd be a lot better. You know, there's a litany of reasons why it's good for businesses to have bank accounts, and that's why we support the Safe Banking Act.
Absolutely. And you know, as I was living in Denver when Colorado legalized, and yeah, it seemed like the only uptick in crime, and that was just my personal experience, was just hearing about robberies, about people carrying cash around now.
Yeah, and I would say it's not really an uptick in crime. It's just it's an interesting story for journalists to cover. I mean, there are robberies every day.
Yes, yes, of course, fair enough.
So I don't want to be like, oh, there's this, you know, scourge of every marijuana dispensary is getting knocked up. It's just, you know, whenever one does, we hear about it, but we don't necessarily hear about every single breaking, you know, B&E on just someone's house or business. So
yeah. It's just a ridiculous thing that shouldn't have to happen. So I have a question from Alex. And then Tom, I've got your question. I'm going to get to that once we get past the legislation. But for the MORE Act and the Safe Banking Act, because I was wondering this too, Alex, so thank you. Does the MORE Act technically cover the Safe Banking Act, because it would be taking cannabis off the Schedule I drugs, giving the cannabis industry the ability to have legal business and have allowances for banking? So if the MORE Act passes in its full glory, do we still need the Safe Banking Act?
No. Because marijuana is no longer federally prohibited and criminalized. So the MORE Act solves the banking problem, and I'm going to hit, Carrie also just asked the question in the chat, does the Safe Banking Act solve the 280E problem? So MORE solves banking and 280E. For those of you who don't know 280E, it's this line in the tax code. Basically, cannabis companies can't take standard business deductions. It's the same kind of policy that they got Al Capone on. So you know, all the things that are incentivized through the tax code, marijuana businesses can't take advantage of. I like to point out that includes healthcare right now in the midst of this global pandemic, because for whatever reason we have an employer-sponsored, supported health insurance system in this country, but that's a different topic. But yeah, so the MORE Act solves both of those problems. The Safe Banking Act, as Carrie asked, does not solve the 280E problem. It only technically solves the banking problem. And even so, the degree of which the Safe Banking Act solves the banking problem is in question, because since marijuana is still a Schedule I substance and the Safe Banking Act is just a safe harbor, you know, I suspect there are some banks that still would be unwilling to engage in harboring this drug money that is still a Schedule I felony substance in this country. So I think more banks would feel comfortable under safe banking, but you know, that's just one of the more nuanced points that I like to get.
Yeah. All right. So we're taking a deeper dive into these two federal bills. One, their federal bill affect all of us, but also, as you said, the MORE Act is such a historical point in time. It's definitely worth a little bit more talking. So we had one more question. So from Jax, what do amendments to the MORE, like, are there amendments that are worth talking about that were suggested or made to the MORE Act?
Yeah, that, thanks, Jax. Hi, Jax. Great to hear you. So yeah, that was, I mentioned that when we were talking about the kind of shortcomings of the bill and how there was language being inserted in at the last minute that was kind of half-baked. What happened was, essentially legislative text from a bill that had been previously introduced was basically copy and pasted in to try to address the tax section. And there's one line of text in there that could be interpreted in such a way that it would completely ban owners who have a previous cannabis conviction on their record. It's something that just, you know, nobody in the marijuana industry had ever noticed this before, and despite the fact that this bill had been out there for years and years, and we're very displeased that it was entered. Again, you know, it's an interpretation issue. We have hard commitments that it's not going to be included again in the next iteration of the bill, and I feel very confident about that. There was an additional amendment that I didn't mention, but that I just want to point out that I hate, is that there was an amendment explicitly making it clear that the entire federal government can still have discriminatory pre-employment and random drug screening for federal employees and contractors. This is something that we think sets a really bad precedent when we're talking about pushing the private sector to no longer have these discriminatory things. You know, it's one thing if we're talking about we don't want, you know, people who are flying planes and driving oil trucks and things like that to be high on the job. We agree with that. But, you know, because just the discriminatory nature that could be used for, that's another thing that we're going to be fighting on in the new Congress, and to keep that out.
Okay, one more question, and then we're going to move into some state stuff. So from Peter, what do you think the chances for Safe Banking Act getting done in 2021? All the major MSO CEOs spoke about their confidence in passage in the Q3 earnings, but no one seems to have an idea when. Fair enough. Yeah. There was a lot of discussion on SAFE being in the stimulus bill, but that seems to have gone silent.
Yeah, I don't
SAFE
ever,
next year.
And maybe one of my colleagues will disagree with me on this, but I don't ever take seriously anything anybody with a financial interest has to say when it comes to the evolving policy landscape at the federal level. I really don't. It was in their interest to tell their investors that things look brighter on the horizon in order for their investors to put more money in their pockets. So I really just don't take those kind of claims seriously, and I would suggest that nobody else, or that everybody else at least takes them with a grain of salt.
And so what are your feelings for SAFE in 2021 then?
I guess I missed that second part, or the first part of the question based on the second part. So the first part of the question, just SAFE in 2021, we just don't know. You know, we're going to have a new committee chairman of the Senate Banking Committee regardless, no matter whether Republicans win Georgia and maintain control, or if Democrats win Georgia and then there's some kind of a power sharing or Democratic control. So it's going to be, you know, either Republican Senator Pat Toomey of Pennsylvania, who has expressed tepid support for the Safe Banking Act, or Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio, Democrat, who has expressed tepid support for the Safe Banking Act. Neither senator is particularly a champion of marijuana policy reform, but both of them are still much more amenable than outgoing Banking Committee Chairman Senator Crapo of Idaho. So, you know, we think we got a better shot, but again, you know, Mitch McConnell has, I said it again, I said it before, I'll say it again. Mitch McConnell takes joy in Americans being arrested and incarcerated for marijuana possession. So it's difficult to see, as he runs the Senate by iron-fisted fiat, that they would advance a bill that undermines his ability to gain joy in watching Americans being arrested and incarcerated for marijuana possession. So it's yet to be determined.
Right. Okay. Gotcha. Then one non-more or safe question about federal policy before we move to the states. Carrie asked, can you comment on the marijuana research bill that passed the House and its likelihood in the Senate?
Yes, I can comment on that. I'm very excited to see that bill passed with a voice vote on suspension, with, you know, that meaning that there wasn't a single member in the chamber who thought it was important to call the roll so that way they can record their opposition to the bill. You know, research is a topic that a lot of politicians and lawmakers like to talk about. I don't think the efficacy is really the way that it's claimed, because currently there are over 34,000 peer-reviewed published studies hosted on PubMed.gov, which is hosted by the federal government. We could have better data, and we really appreciate the bill's sponsors working with us to expand the scope of the bill from its original introduction, because now it would allow researchers access to the same products that are being sold at dispensaries. The previous iteration of the bill did not. You know, from our view, you know, we could have better data. Absolutely, saying we don't have data is just silly and flat out wrong. But we could have better data, and the best kind of data we're going to have is what how the substances that consumers are purchasing at dispensaries impacts them, and that's what this bill does. In the Senate, just because we're running out of time, it's difficult to see the Senate taking it up today or tomorrow. before the end of the year, but I think it sets a good trajectory for that kind of an effort in the new Congress.
Great. Okay. So Christy, I've got your question, and I'm going to address that when we get to Tom's question too. I think they kind of go together. They make sense together. So I'm not skipping you. I'm just pausing that particular question. Okay. So moving on to the states, we had some successful legislation, and I'm going to ask Karen to talk about the Vermont situation. What did Vermont?
Sure. So Vermont became only the second state legislature ever to pass full legalization and regulation earlier this year. The other state was Illinois. We were very involved in both of them, and both of them took many, many years to get to this point. It looked for a little bit like the coronavirus might derail the legislation, as happened in other states. It was a long process. The legislature and governor had first approved legal possession and cultivation back in 2018. Then they set up a work group to look at how to legalize and regulate marijuana sales. The Senate passed it last year. The House passed a different version. And then right when they were about to appoint a conference committee, everything was shut down. But they did hammer out the details. It has some strong provisions to make sure there's a prioritization of businesses that are good actors, that have good labor practices, environmental practices, diversity, other factors like that when they do licensing, and also to prioritize small scale cultivation. The governor ended up allowing it to become law without a signature. He's a Republican governor, so it's the first Republican governor to allow legalization to happen. And in tandem, there was a separate bill that passed in Vermont to automatically expunge past convictions for lower level possession and cultivation. And we're really happy that the governor signed that into law as well. And it also creates a buffer. So if somebody possesses or grows about double the possession limit, it would just be a civil offense instead of being a criminal offense that could result in somebody actually getting jail time and a criminal record. So we're optimistic that in addition to these pretty strong laws passing, the governor expressed a commitment to having even stronger equity provisions early next year. So we expect this to continue getting stronger and better as it's implemented. And I know Justin will talk about Virginia, but before that, one other piece of legislation that I wanted to plug briefly is in Louisiana, where they have a pretty limited medical program that's kind of inched a little closer and closer to being a decent medical program. A Republican lawmaker who had opposed medical cannabis put in a bill to allow doctors to recommend for any debilitating medical condition. Previously, there was a list of specific conditions. So that was a pretty significant jump forward to allow more access to more patients, and we hope that other states will follow suit.
Well, I can't complain about you plugging legislation. It's what we're all about. All right, so Tom, take it away. Talk about Virginia for a minute.
I'm actually going to talk about Virginia, if that's all right. So yeah, Virginia is near and dear to my heart.
Okay. I'm sorry, Justin.
No worries. It says the state where I got my start working on marijuana policy as a legislative aide, drafting one of the initial bills that would later become the decriminalization bill. And Virginia NORML did yeoman's work under Jen Michelle Padini to really radicalize the state government and get them to move forward. So in the last 2 years, Virginia not only has decriminalized marijuana and done so in such a way that I think is a good model for future decriminalization efforts of it's a civil fine, only a $25 ticket, to lowest priority. It also expanded its very limited extract program into a full-born medical marijuana program, implementing a policy similar to what Karen just described with Louisiana, but a little bit more robust under the messaging framework of let doctors decide, which is something that we see in a lot of other medical marijuana states where they have just that one line or any other position that or any other ailment that a doctor shall deem necessary. That was that we thought that was an uphill battle to climb in Virginia, and we were able to get that done, or the state government was able to get that done. And then lastly, the state government also passed a bill prohibiting the searching of vehicles based on merely the odor of cannabis. And that's a big deal because in the state of Virginia, just like all around the country, the odor of cannabis, however faint, or however suspected even, just by law enforcement can trigger a search. And it could, we've seen lawyers credibly argue that as a violation of constitutional rights, of privacy. But unfortunately, too often those individuals who are having their car searched are not in a position to be able to afford a crack legal team to be able to take that case to court and argue those kind of positions. So, changing that legal precedent was a really big deal and a win so close to the nation's capital where so many of the federal lawmakers live. So we're really excited about the progress in Virginia.
Yeah, we might come back to
One
that.
thing to add on Virginia, if I can.
Yeah.
Just in the past month or so, state officials released 2 separate reports looking ahead to what a legal and regulated market for adult use cannabis could look like. One of those reports was mandated by a provision in that decriminalization bill that Justin mentioned, and another was mandated by a separate resolution. And in conjunction with the release of one of those reports, Governor Ralph Northam announced that he's in favor of legalizing marijuana and said that he will be sponsoring legislation in the upcoming 2021 session to make that happen. And I think we're going to talk a little bit more about 2021 in a minute, but I just wanted to point that out as an example of how oftentimes these incremental reforms beget broader reforms.
Yeah, and also how some of these, which had echoes of what was in the MORE Act, as the states pass stuff, that just puts more and more pressure on Congress. So yeah, anything. And on that same topic, I made this map of every state that had a bill that mentioned marijuana that actually passed this year. And this is a crazy year, as you all know. And a lot of legislation just got dropped, and a lot of focus was on economic issues, health issues, and to some degree, racial justice issues. So as you can see from the map, almost all the states were still doing something on marijuana. Montana, Nevada, Texas didn't have a regular session this year. So there's that. They just didn't meet this year. So looking at the map, I just wanted to point out that there is things happening. They're not necessarily all good, of course.
Marijuana policy, all the cool lawmakers are doing it.
Exactly. And so these underlined things, when you get this slide, are all links. And so this all 2020 passed bills will take you to a list of everything that passed. If you're curious of seeing what passed in your state, that will take you to a page where you can go look at that. All right. And I have lost track of the questions. That's good. That's good. We are all okay. Moving on to failed bills, but that were still interesting. Again, to speak possibly to what might come up in the future. I'm going to start with Tom a little bit about the New York and Rhode Island budget requests, and then we'll move into the bills.
Sure. So in New York and Rhode Island, actually in both cases for the second year in a row, the governors in those states included marijuana legalization in their annual budget requests. Didn't come to pass in either place, although increasingly, especially after the passage of the ballot measures in 5 states last month, it seems like hopes are pretty high in both places for next year.
Great. And is there, I mean, obviously states are quite motivated to find these sources of revenue.
Yeah, they need some money. They might as well legalize, tax, and regulate marijuana rather than having their constituents go buy it in neighboring states where marijuana is legal. Yep.
All right. So Karen, do you want to talk about some of the state stuff that happened, or in this case?
Sure. So as was alluded to, legislative sessions usually run from about January to June, and most of the action when you see things pass is usually from March to June, which is right when everything was shutting down. Legislators, for the most part, maybe none of them that I know of, met remotely prior to coronavirus. And in addition to just the not being able to physically meet, there were so many pressing needs with unemployment insurance and other things. So a lot of bills that we were really optimistic about leading into 2020 ended up sadly being derailed. For medical cannabis, Alabama, Kentucky, and South Carolina all looked like they had really good chances going in. Before the virus shut things down, the Alabama Senate and the Kentucky House both passed medical cannabis bills. They didn't get to be taken up in the other chamber because of the virus derailing things. In South Carolina, The previous legislative session, bills had gotten out of committee but hadn't gotten a floor vote. Bills were both scheduled for committee hearings and then everything shut down. So that was really disappointing, and hopefully in all 3 states they'll be able to finish the work this year. In Connecticut, for the first year ever, the governor put in a legalization bill. He had a bunch of agency heads testify in committee. The vote count looked very, very solid. We were feeling pretty good about the chances of legalizing in Connecticut. Again, everything got derailed because of the coronavirus. So hopefully next year things will be better. And then there were a bunch of other states, including North Carolina, that had other bills too. Whether or not some of them had as strong of a chance, maybe not quite as strong, but they certainly were introduced and to start the conversation, because these bills usually take a few years to kind of get momentum and work out details and concerns before they end up passing in most cases.
Those North Carolina bills got a lot of traffic on BillTrack50. So a lot of people were looking at them. So people in North Carolina, citizens of North Carolina apparently were interested in what they would do, or else somebody on Facebook had a good campaign going. But
well, they should definitely write their legislators, because so far they haven't acted as much as.
Yeah, get on that, North Carolinians. Right, and then I picked out this New York one because it was, to me, pretty interesting about, they were setting up an Office of Cannabis Management to kind of see to licensing and production and, you know, all of the regulatory stuff, which I thought was a pretty interesting bill. So again, these are all links and you can check these out when you get the slides. All right, so that is a roundup. Justin, do you want to, or Tom, chime in on any of these bills?
Nope, Karen covered it greatly.
I thought so too. Okay then. So of course, we don't have a crystal ball, but based on how some things did, as Karen was just pointing out, we can make some guesses. And additionally, of course, the states that legalized are going to need to pass some bills. So New Jersey has already introduced some bills implementing legalization. So I just wanted to highlight those. And then, yeah, so Karen, you want to talk about our chances of legalization, either adult use in general or medical?
Yeah, sure. I already mentioned Alabama, Kentucky, and South Carolina last time. I'm feeling pretty optimistic that those have very solid chances this coming year. Again, everybody should write their legislators, reach out, let them know how important it is to constituents, especially people who themselves have serious medical conditions. Those really move hearts and minds and move people to action that otherwise would be quiet supporters. On legalization, there are 7 states that I think have a very real chance of legalizing. I don't think that means I'd, bet the house that all 7 will, but any one of them could very realistically legalize this coming year. Connecticut, Delaware, Maryland, New Mexico, New York, Rhode Island, and Virginia. All of them have strong public support. There's been a lot of groundwork laid in the states. In Connecticut, as I mentioned, the governor has a bill. In Delaware, with the elections, there's slightly more supportive legislature, and it borders New Jersey, which just passed legalization. It's just a short drive. They already have decrim. It helps create momentum. In Maryland, there's been a lot of work done and groundwork laid. And, again, it's looking like it could be doable. The elections also helped in New Mexico, where some conservative Democrats that were opposed to legalization were ousted. The governor's long been supportive there.
And Arizona next door just legalized.
Yeah. In New York, Cuomo's been saying for a few years he's included it in his budget, but this year he sounds like he's really, really, really wanting to get it done. And last year, the budget negotiations ended up kind of being derailed by the crisis with coronavirus, which was hitting right when the budget was due on April 1st in that state. So there's a lot of optimism that they'll actually get it done. In Rhode Island, the biggest impediment had been the Speaker of the House, and he lost his election. So the new Speaker of the House and the Senate Majority Leader are now talking like they can do it. The governor's been on board for a while. Virginia, NORML's been way more involved than we have. Justin, I think, already touched on it, but you might want to say a few more words as well.
Virginia is in play.
Right. Can I add something on Rhode Island quickly? So as we mentioned, it's been in the governor's budget. In her most recent one this year, she proposed doing cannabis sales through state-run stores rather than state-licensed private stores. And there was a hearing in the Senate Finance Committee just a couple of weeks ago, and it seemed like most of the debate among the members was around this idea: should it be in state-run stores, which would be a unique situation? We don't have that in any other state in the United States. Or should it be like all the other legal states do it? And the debate didn't really seem to be very much about should we legalize marijuana, which I thought was interesting.
Definitely. Okay.
If I could chime in one thing on Maryland, where I just touched base with my activists there 2 weeks ago, and they're very happy with the bill that just came out and the possibility of advancing it through the state legislature. One concern, just throwing it out if any of the panelists or any of the attendees may have deep pockets, is to do some political polling in some of the primary states for the presidential contest: Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and Nevada, as far as Republican support for marijuana reform. Because with Governor Hogan posturing to show that he may run for president, I think that's going to be one of the biggest deciding factors in Maryland after the legislature passes the bill, hopefully.
All right, so I'm going to ask a couple of questions about states from the viewers, and then we're going to try to blow through. We only have a few minutes to get through kind of the impact of the election, although, Justin, I feel like you already covered a lot of that. All right, so we have some interest in our audience about Texas. Alton, can you talk a little bit about Texas laws and future? Starting to see dispensaries popping up in Houston. And then also someone that is anonymous would like to know, what are the chances in Pennsylvania? Karen, do you want to field those?
Sure. So in Texas, as some folks might know, there's a very low THC law that allows only 3 businesses in the entire state. It has pretty limited conditions and doctors. It's inched forward a little bit. I wouldn't be surprised if it at least inches forward a little bit more this coming year, but one obstacle to any major reform is the Lieutenant Governor, Dan Patrick, who has opposed, decrim reform. He's kind of like the boss of the Senate, so the Senate doesn't move things typically if he says not to. There's a great group there, Texans for Responsible Marijuana Reform, that folks can plug into for more. They're definitely pushing. There will be a legalization bill. There have been legalization bills before. There have been decrim bills that at a minimum got out of committee, but the Lieutenant Governor has been a real obstacle that has limited the amount of progress. So, the more people mobilize, the more you reach out to your legislators, the better chances, but this Lieutenant Governor is definitely an obstacle.
Yeah, and just to highlight that point, in 2019, a decriminalization bill passed to the House in Texas, but it just wasn't even brought up in the Senate due to what Karen just said.
There you go. Okay, and
Texas NORML as well, led by Jax Finkel, who's actually one of our attendees right now.
Yes, and I think they're under that umbrella. They work closely together if they're not part of the group, but she's awesome.
And how about Pennsylvania?
So Pennsylvania's governor and lieutenant governor are all in on making marijuana legal. Both of the legislative chambers are controlled by Republican leaders who have publicly said they oppose legalization. They have said it in slightly less strident terms recently than they did before. But we've gotten a handful of Republican votes total in most states. So it's definitely a harder challenge if you have leadership that's opposed. It has to get through committees. I wouldn't say it's impossible this year, but I am way less optimistic about it than other states. There's some discussion about improving the medical program in some ways as well.
All right, thank you. Perfect. So that is what we're seeing, guessing about the future as best we can. All right, so then of course, this has been a year that had things happen. One of those things was the election. Another was a wave of protests and a new awareness of maybe some diversity issues, equity issues, such like that. And then also, of course, coronavirus. I doubt we'll get to the coronavirus. Well, we'll try. So the election. Justin, you already spoke about some of Harris's opinions. Do you want to tackle quick?
Yes. And being mindful, I'll try to be very quick. So Joe Biden was one of the principal architects for the escalation of the war on drugs and the incarceration of tens of thousands of Americans as a result of marijuana policy and criminalization. He is undergoing his own personal evolution on this now in a very public fashion. We are encouraged by that. We seek to hold him accountable to the commitments that he made, calling for national decriminalization, which again, the only intellectually consistent and honest and way government works way to do that is to remove marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act entirely. So I hope all of you out there will help us, and together we will hold him accountable.
All right, and if it somehow gets out, if the MORE Act somehow gets out of the Senate, he will sign it. So
I think Vice President Kamala Harris would kick his butt if he doesn't sign it and it gets passed.
So speaking of the Senate, the control thereof is still up in the air. How much is that going to matter?
It's going to matter a tremendous amount. I mean, we see Democratic leader Senator Chuck Schumer, really taking every opportunity he can to talk about marijuana policy. He just published an op-ed in Univision a couple days ago. He's published numerous op-eds on it. He's carrying a bill in the Senate called the Marijuana Freedom and Opportunity Act. His staff and I talk on a regular basis. They're very excited about tackling this issue. They think it's a good thing for them politically and policy-wise. And again, I don't care why you agree with me, as long as you do. So I think should he be the Senate leader, it would be much easier for us to get through the Senate. But that being said, it still won't be easy due to the filibuster and some of the more conservative members in the Democratic caucus. And then Mitch McConnell, I'll reiterate it, finds joy in Americans being arrested and incarcerated for marijuana possession.
All right, so you have covered a little bit about the MORE Act's equity and diversity issues, and then several of you mentioned in the states that those, like in the Virginia bill, and then I think we had a special session bill that was a good example for us to talk about. Justin, I believe you are a fan of talking about Virginia. Do you want to talk?
Yeah. The special session bill was the one about searching autos.
Right.
That's something in Virginia, just as every other state in this country, the criminalization of cannabis is disproportionately enforced against people of color and people who are poor. This is something that is no surprise to any even casual observer of American politics or policy. And unfortunately, it's just the case. The ACLU found that across the country, a Black person is 3.8 times more likely to be arrested for a marijuana-related crime. And American public policy in every aspect of it is touched by marijuana policy. And even these minor criminal offenses that are given, again, disproportionately to young people of color, give them the arrest record, which then make further interactions with the criminal justice system compounded to be that much worse. So it's an integral part. The MORE Act was in the platform of the Movement for Black Lives. Marijuana policy is something that was discussed by Black Lives Matter protesters around the country. I was down in the streets in DC almost every single day in June, in solidarity. And it's something that it was discussed. I didn't bring it up, people, just talking to people and they would bring it up. So it's just one of those like entry levels of into the incarceral state. And ending its criminalization is not going to solve racism in America in any way, shape, or form, but it is going to lessen its impacts.
Excellent. That was quick and surprisingly thorough. All right, so coronavirus, we were talking about how that might motivate some more legalization. People might, whatever. Anyway, we've already talked about that a little bit. And I'm just going to leave this slide up. I would like to actually tackle the questions that we had, and we're just about out of time. But I do want to read this question from Tom. I do not use marijuana, but I'm excited for the social justice and tax revenue aspects of legalizing recreational marijuana in New Jersey. I'm even considering a career realignment into the industry. Are there authoritative and frequently updated repositories of career opportunities for the industry in New Jersey or nationally? And then Lisa was also asked about testing, and not Lisa, I'm sorry, it was, and is there going to be better testing available? So when marijuana is legalized, employers can actually tell what's going on. Let me actually read it. If marijuana is legalized federally, so employers can tell if their employees in safety-sensitive positions are actually under the influence at the time of work-related accident, such as can be done with alcohol. For example, employees who drive company vehicles are not permitted to be under the influence. So, of course, blood alcohol is, are you drunk now? And, marijuana testing has never been, are you high now? So both of those kind of go together. Like, right, we're out of time, but would anybody weigh in
On the first question really quick, I know
Yeah.
there's a couple of staffing firms that specialize in the cannabis industry. There's, I think it's
Interesting.
called THC staffing or something like that. And then there's another one, I can't think of the name of it, but I think it begins with a V. That's the best I can do.
Excellent. So there are people specializing.
I think it's called Verdant, maybe. I'm not sure.
Love that. Okay, so Tom, you might check that out, or just Google around for staffing agencies that specialize in marijuana. I didn't know that was a thing. Fantastic. And how about testing so that legalization? I mean, I thought Christy's question made sense. Does anyone want to tackle it?
So I know there's some things in development. There is a website that has a product that's essentially alert testing, which tests individuals' skills, whether they're drowsy, they're under the influence of anything. And that makes a lot more sense than seeing if somebody has cannabinoids in their blood or urine from having used it days and days earlier. I don't know how advanced it is or widespread, but that type of thing would certainly make way more sense. And I hope it's developed more. I think Paul Armentano of NORML was involved in like a DUI related thing where you can test your own self for your impairment, the same kind of thing, like rapid eye move tracking, just skills that are necessary to being able to be responsive when you're driving. And I would hope that things would move in that direction. It makes way more sense for all kinds of substances and just being able to perform your job
Well,
safely.
and also being super sleepy is dangerous for driving.
Exactly.
More generic test though makes sense. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, so thank you for that. Right, so I'm afraid that we are out of time. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, panel. That was fascinating, and I thought a pretty thorough discussion of this year and what might happen next year. And then I just wanted to say thank you. I'm Karen. And so you've got the contact info for everybody up top. And then here's my contact info if you want to reach out to me. And again, you'll be getting all these slides and all this information in your inbox. So thank you very much for coming. And I would like to give Justin, Karen, and Tom a chance to say one last thing. Justin.
Don't stop the fight. We've come so far, but there's still ways to go. And please, 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 let's help hold all these lawmakers accountable who have uttered nice things when they were on the campaign trail.
Please feel free to plug NORML.
Oh yeah, plug NORML. I just put it in the thing, normal.org. I'm halfway through writing normal.org/act, which is our page where we track all of the legislation. Thank you, Karen of BillTrack50 for the amazing tool. We also have the map on our ACT page where you can find your state and all the different bills, and we sort it by priority legislation and types of legislation. And I so very much, I can't speak highly enough of my colleagues on this panel, Karen O'Keefe and Tom Angell, for all the amazing work that they do and the great perspectives and long experience that they have. I'm still the new kid on the block. I've only been here for 4 years. So, it's a really exciting time to be in marijuana policy reform. And we got to get it right.
All right, Karen.
Right back at you. I'm so impressed with your work on MORE and everything else at NORML. Anyone who wants to get involved should definitely go to our website, sign up for our email alerts. We have a state page for every single state that says kind of what's going on. We send email alerts when bills are hopping in your state. NORML does the same thing. So sign up for our email alerts, like us on Facebook, follow us on social media. It really, state legislative districts are pretty small, and a relatively small handful of people can make a huge influence. So reach out to your lawmakers, but don't be rude. I've literally heard of lawmakers that voted no because someone was mean to them. It's silly and petty to criminalize people for that reason, but don't be the reason that they do that, please.
All right, excellent. Tom.
Thank you to Justin and Karen and all their colleagues for writing and shaping and passing so many pieces of marijuana legislation, which gives us and our team at Marijuana Moment so many things to cover every day. Without you, it'd be a pretty thin and boring newsletter we send every day. And on that note, if folks on this webinar care about marijuana policy, and you do because you're here listening right now, you should get our daily newsletter. Go to marijuanamoment.net and sign up for it.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience. Hopefully you found this informative, and stay safe, everybody. All right. Bye-bye.
Give us your money. Donate to NORML, MPP, and Marijuana Moment too. COVID is tough. our average contribution is $27. I don't know about Tom or MPP, but I give Tom $27 a month.
Thank you.
No, so give us money too, please. That'd be nice.
Sure.
Yes,
Thank you,
Thanks.
Karen.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
thanks, everybody.